Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. What's up, fam? This is the 3D Podcast, and I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today. He's a past colleague, a mentor, and a legend in his own right. I'm talking about Stephen Brown. To provide a little context before we get started, Stephen is currently the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Molson Coors Beverage Company, where he is currently responsible for the execution of the company's diversity and inclusion strategy across the business. Prior to joining Molson Coors, Stephen was the head of global inclusion and diversity and the executive HR business partner for leadership programs at GE Healthcare. Overall, Stephen has over 20 plus years of HR experience in various roles of increasing responsibility. So I hope you're ready to soak up this knowledge because I know I am. So without further ado, let's get started and let's go into this thing. So Stephen, welcome to the show. And how are you doing today?
Cedric, good to be here and I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Look, we've known each other for what? Got to be over 10 years, right?
Close.
At least.
You were a young lad when I met you.
I was going to say a little tyke, but yeah, young lad works. But through those years, right? I mean, definitely been instrumental in my career, and so glad to have you on the call. So, I know I gave a brief intro, but for those of out there who don't know you, would you mind just sharing your story, kind of walking us through your background, how you got into HR a little bit, as well as ultimately, how you got into diversity and inclusion, and just tell us a little bit about who Stephen Brown is. So basically, I want you to just talk your stuff, man.
Sure. Listen, I'm from Milwaukee. I'm a native of Milwaukee. I still live in Milwaukee. This is my home. And so I had a chance I went to through Milwaukee Public Schools here. Then I went to a college about an hour from here, University of Wisconsin, Whitewater, where my degree is in finance. And then ended up doing my master's at Marquette. I had a sponsoring company. So I was part of this organization called Inroads. I had a sponsoring company, and I worked at a bank for my first 5 years after undergrad. And I ended up making a transition between finance and human resources, really as a part of just kind of bringing talent within the organization, because I was an intern there. And I had been working there after college. I knew the company. I was able to identify with young talent. And it was so that transition happened for me. It wasn't my plan to come to human resources, but it was just more of I understood the business side of it, but also had a chance to just how I was able to relate to people and share with them in regards to their careers and why banking made some sense. I transitioned from the bank to Miller Brewing Company. And I did that for about 4 years. Again, Miller is based here in Milwaukee. So I did that about 4 years and then relocated to Cincinnati for about a year to work at one of our breweries as an HR leader. Came back to Milwaukee, decided that it was time for me to leave Miller. I was ready for the next level of opportunity. So I went to SC Johnson, which is in Racine, which is about an hour from Milwaukee, but interested enough, about 30 minutes from Kenosha. We may talk about what's happening in Kenosha right now. So I worked at SC Johnson for 4 years. Then had a unique chance to come back to Miller. After being gone from Miller for 4 years, I came back for a year. And I have to tell you, I was gone for 4 years. The company had transitioned from being Miller Brewing Company to SAB Miller. And I'm not sure if that connection worked for me. I think sometimes you have to just kind of pause and say, are you where you need to be? And I just figured out that I wasn't. So I decided to join GE Healthcare. And my plan was to be at GE for, a couple years. So I got to figure out what I wanted to do and how it made sense. And did I want to stay in Milwaukee? I was kind of frustrated that I wasn't at the director level of HR that I wanted to be. My wife and I said, listen, if I'm not a director, by a certain age, then I'm going to just, leave the city. And I have to tell you, I went to GE and It was a global company. It stretched me. It challenged me. I became affiliated with a number of our programs there. One of them that you know very well, our Affinity Network, African American Forum. I ended up getting involved with at the corporate level. A couple years turned into 14 years. And while I was there, not only did I have a chance to really travel globally, but I had the chance to also start to think about where I can make more impact as I transitioned from being kind of the leader of our African American affinity group. I really realized that I wanted to continue to maybe narrow in my focus much more on diversity and inclusion, or there we call it inclusion and diversity. It just kind of evolved from there. So it's been a very rich career. It's been one that some cases I planned for. In other cases, it just kind of happened based on people seeing some opportunities in me, but also me being very clear on some things I wanted to do.
Man, as you was going through that, I'm be honest with you, Rolling Stone came in my head. I'm like thinking some Temptations.
But then I will say this: in February this year, I decided to leave GE. I took a role here at Molson Coors. It's an interesting enough again. So this is now my third tour of duty at this organization, but it's different, right? Again, the first time was Miller Brewing Company. Second time was SAB Miller. Now it's Molson Coors, but same building, different culture, different things happening. And, I joined the company March 30th, and it's been a whole lot happening, not only within company, but also in the US and the world. And so it was a really interesting time for me to transition to a new company after leaving a company I've been with, for the past 14 and a half years.
I mean, one, that's amazing, right? Just to understand the background, but there's two things there I want to touch on. The first one is you mentioned that you wanted to be a director by a certain age. And I think that that's a lot of many people that are like career oriented, goal oriented, want to be successful. They put the timelines on when they want to get into this role or when they want something to happen. And so really what I want to do is if you could just give advice to someone kind of navigating through their career right now, whether they're in diversity, whether they're in HR or whatever that may be, like what advice would you give them, just given that you have many different experiences at many different companies? So looking back on that, if you could talk to someone who's probably early in the career, 5-10 years, what advice would you give them as they navigate?
Don't focus on the title, focus on the opportunity. Okay. And focus on the skills and the experience you can get from that. When I moved from the bank to Miller back in, I think 95, I was assistant vice president at the bank. And to be 26 years old and be assistant vice president was a huge accomplishment. Then I went to Miller and I was a corporate recruiter, and people looked at me like, there's a step back, right? And I'm like, no, it really isn't, because one, I'm making more money, which is kind of interesting. But then two, I was comfortable at the bank. I interned there. I was there for 5 years. They knew me. I could probably still be there, frankly, if I wanted to. But I wanted to stretch myself. I knew that if I wanted to be in this space called human resources, having labor relations experience, having operational experience was important. I kind of swallowed my ego and said, I'm going for this opportunity and not worry about the title. Having said that, once I got into it, I thought, by a certain age, I should be a director. That's my level of success. It wasn't happening for me. So what was really kind of interesting, and you know this too, Cedric, at GE Healthcare, we don't have directors and VPs. You have, like you can be promoted to an executive band, right? But so interesting enough, I was promoted to an executive there, but I still wasn't necessarily a director. I'm like, obviously, I'm so concentrated on titles, but the opportunity is what I should be focused on. So balance yourself. I'm not saying don't have an interest in progressing, but sometimes it makes sense for you to get this skill set or this experience so you can add that to what you are so you can be more competitive versus, again, me being assistant vice president, which I earned, but it wasn't necessarily going to get me to where I wanted to be. So just balance on the opportunity versus the title. Because, titles, you can put anything in your business card, but when you start digging deep in what does that title mean and what did you do and what did you produce, then that's when the question is like, but look at my title. You want to talk about what you're able to accomplish and how you change what you were doing. No,
I 100% agree. I love the experience over titles, right? Because that's where you get that learning and that development. And even in the times now, right? It's tough times that we're in, but this is one of those times where you get a lot of experience, right? Especially in HR, diversity and inclusion. I mean, probably a variety of companies, right? In those times, you develop the most because you have to think outside of the box on how things get done and what's
Absolutely.
happening.
Absolutely.
And so kind of going into the second point, and you mentioned a little bit with Kenosha. So, before we get into the topic of the show, you currently live in and are from Wisconsin, and, recent events in the state have left, a young Black man, Jacob Blake, paralyzed from the waist down after being shot 7 times, point blank range, in the back by a Kenosha police officer. And being from the state and not too far from where this took place, I would love to hear your thoughts on the situation from a couple of different perspectives. One, kind of, being a Black man, and then 2, if any thoughts on like you being a parent in the situation, and then, 3, just, a member of the broader community, and, what have you seen, since this event has happened in the community?
Hey man, listen, these are really heavy times, and there's a situation that when you see it on the television impacts you, but the closer it gets to home, you start to feel like that's part of who you are. I think that what we've experienced, I'm going to talk about Kenosha in a minute, but we've experienced over the last 6 months, unfortunately, is not new, but it's getting old, right? And for a Black man who grew up here in Milwaukee, coming from a single household and, growing up in the city, I saw, kind of a lot of this. And then frankly, having advanced my career here, I recognize that I'm still, in many cases, just a Black man who might be driving, or a Black man who might be walking, or a Black man who might be shopping. And they don't care about my credentials. They don't care about, the things that I accomplish, because of the way that we are still viewed by a part of society. And when we continue to lose our young Black men, and fortunately in Mr. Blake's situation, he didn't lose his life, but he lost a huge part of how he now has to live. And it's heavy. It's really heavy. It's what, the conversation I have amongst my friends, the conversation I have even at work, is that, I'm in this space to help people go through this journey of inclusion, but sometimes I have to pause and help myself and breathe, because, I recognize that there's some situations. I'm very fortunate that could have been someone that I knew, someone that I loved, or it could have been me. I am a father, and I have to tell you, there are cases that, my wife and I have only one child, and it's a female, a young lady who just graduated from college. And sometimes I would say to myself, I'm fortunate I don't have a son. And that's sad to say. Not that this can't happen to our Black women, getting Senator Bland. I mean, you can, so I'm not saying that it can't happen to women, but for me to have to even think that I'm happy that I don't have a son because there's a different level of conversation is disturbing. And so it's heavy, man. And again, Kenosha is only an hour from Milwaukee. It's situations that what I do appreciate though about what I'm seeing, Cedric, is that the situations that we're seeing that's happening way too frequently in the U.S. and beyond, more and more people are becoming part of the movement to see how we can change the system. And one of my concerns is that we don't see this as a moment, but we do see it as a movement. And what very specifically can we continue to change? But let's be clear, what's happening right now isn't new. And what's happening right now is not going to change easily. But you continue to have people, talk about what needs to change, but it's going to take some time. And I hate that it has to take that time. They also think that I hate that it's, I don't want this to be a news cycle, right? So then next week we talk about someone else, and then the Blake story kind of goes on back and out. And well, we actually are talking about someone else this week, right? And so it just becomes, it's challenging, man. And so we have to, as a community of Blacks, as a community of people who care for our communities, kind of help figure out how to help our kids deal with this as well. Because the level of trauma this continues to build in our community can last for a lifetime. And so I somehow we have to figure out how to deal with this nonsense that's going on, but also protect the innocence, but also the opportunities for the next generation.
And I think that last part is the piece that really struck when you think about his children being in the car in the back seat. the sound, the visual aspect of all that stuff, right? You can only imagine. I can only imagine. That's just something that they probably won't ever forget.
It's true trauma. And then they take that with them to their school, then they take that to home, and, who knows the residual when they become adults. And, it's just, and we don't, and unfortunately, we already have so many decades and centuries of trauma. And now you add another layer of trauma and you say, get over it. Well, no, this is heavy stuff that we have to deal with. And so it's real. That trauma is real. And my wife happened to be an educator. So I recognize, the things that she deals with in the school system with our kids, not because they want to be difficult, but the trauma they have to deal with. And yes, all families can deal with a certain level of trauma, but we keep compounding onto that trauma is something that is piercing and penetrates and long lasting within our communities.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that with all of that trauma that's there, the ways in which we can have the outlets to talk about it, to express it. I think the community looks at therapists in one way, right? Therapists, psychologists and things like that. But this is one of those times to where being able to find a release point or some way in which we can start to discuss and talk about these things is needed, because as it balls up and builds up inside of you, at some point, right, the pressure is going to get to a point to where it has to be released, right? And the ways in which that is released is hopefully, for the good, or we try to get it, or that is done in a way that's impactful or constructive versus, going down other routes, either violence or things like that. So it's a tough one to deal with. The situation is tough overall. As we look at this situation, as you look at COVID-19, as you look at, unemployment that's skyrocketing, as it relates to diversity and inclusion, it appears to me that we are in a situation that if organizations get this wrong, they will have major long-term negative effects from missing a mark here. You said it feels a little bit different. It's not just a moment, right? It's actually a movement. So in this time, my question to you is, how are you approaching this in your role and in your responsibilities as you're leading your organization through these challenging times as it relates to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, listen, that's a great question, because I would say to you that the things that we're facing right now, so I'm going to add on to one of the things that you shared. So again, I share with you that I rejoined the company March of this year. Well, a month before I rejoined the company, we had a mass shooting here in Milwaukee at my company. And so one employee shot and killed 5 other employees. So for us, So this is February, and then March we had the global pandemic that we all had to work from home and work differently. And then in June you had a lot of the social unrest. And so those 3 incidents alone are heavy. But then you combine all of them that are happening at the same time. This hasn't happened before. This is real time, and we're learning from real time. But I will say that one of the things that I'm kind of learning in this piece of it is that, and I think this is what we're doing well at, is we're giving our employees an opportunity to listen. We're asking all of our employees to listen. We're asking people to listen and giving opportunities for them to listen, right? And so literally, we took a day out of our company, I think it was June 5th, and we just had a listening session throughout the company. So we really kind of paused operation. And anyone that wanted to speak, you could speak. When we asked people to speak, no one can reply. It was a listening piece there. But from that listening, then the action plan that I had been working on, frankly, I just tossed that aside and said, what are people saying they need? Because the reality of it is, you can't disconnect when you come into work. You bring that with you, right? And the reality also is that many of us are even working where we live. And so it's not even like you're actually transitioning. So I think one of the things that we're working on with our company is learning from what we heard, and then how you incorporate that piece into our D&I action plan. And very specifically, how you continue to educate the workforce around what does injustice look like? What does discrimination look like? What does racism look like? What does we're just putting some definition behind the words. And frankly, we're using the words. In the past, Cedric, you steered away from having conversation around race in the organization, unless you were in a diversity workshop or training, which that whole thing, because I'm not sure how you train diversity. You can certainly, you can certainly expand someone's understanding of what inclusion looks like. We're putting a name to what it is and then saying, how do we help our organization recover and heal from this collectively? The other piece is that we have made it very clear, and I say we, came directly from our CEO, is that this is how our company is. We can't control your behavior outside this organization. But when you're here, you have expectations and you have behaviors that are going to be acceptable or not acceptable. And the non-acceptable, we're going to deal with it immediately. And if you don't want to deal with those non-acceptable behaviors here, then this is not a company for you. And the CEO said that without me prompting him to say it, right? So now that we put this in writing, we had a company-wide call. So you need to be able to talk about what is the behavior and action and the culture that you want to build in this organization. Now, on the side, we also, and I really appreciate this, we also donated to some of the cause, but we had to be really careful ourselves, and we actually put this in writing too. We had to be really careful about saying what shouldn't be done outside of work when we had some work to do internally. If you looked at, the representation we have at our senior level, the representation we have at our board, the pipeline that we have, we knew we had some work to do. And so we said, it's a powerful word called and. I can work on internal issues and I can be committed to the external causes. And there's a fine balance in doing both. And we're making a very conscious effort to do both. While we're learning in real time, we will do some things that may not be perceived as right to everybody. And we are doing some things that saying, why are you mixing work with politics? Why are you mixing work with social causes? Because you can't separate it. And companies are expected to be much more socially conscious. And that's something that we are not going to be able to walk away from. So if you're not going to walk away from it, embrace it and say, how can I make real impact internally and also invest in the external causes?
And you mentioned that behaviors, right? So these behaviors that you're trying to develop. And so how do you, when you think about education and training in the role that it plays, like what is that? What role does training and or education play within your organization as it relates to developing those behaviors as well as, addressing some of the challenges that we find ourselves in?
It's been a laser focus for us. And I'm being really careful that I can't talk about too much before I joined the company in March. But I can tell you since March, there's a conversation that you have good intentions versus being very intentional, right? And so we have decided to be very intentional about how we're going to educate our employees, our leaders, our middle management of what does inclusion look like. We've implemented monthly, what we call inclusion in action series, that we're educating people. Some of this is sometimes those of us who live this, we look through a lens like, if I see it, why don't you see it? And so what we have to pause in the space is, you have to assume that not everyone looks through life through the same lens that you look through life.
Yep, correct.
So we're being very, very intentional about saying, particularly if you continue on this theory of the lenses, let's pretend like you have no vision. How do I help you become clear on what it is? And so the way that we do that is being very, very intentional about putting learning, education, awareness sessions in place for people to understand what the lens is that we expect for them to work at. So we've now implemented monthly inclusion action series. On the week of October 5th, we're having what we call Week of Inclusion. We're bringing workshops together and programming. I'm holding monthly D&I town hall meetings to help continue to bring awareness to what we do. Because unless you have a firm foundation of awareness, the opportunity to become an advocate and the opportunity to take action weakens. So you have to kind of just go from the beginning of, are you educating your managers, your employees on what does awareness look like, and being very intentional about what that looks like. So we're putting those processes, but we have to be very thoughtful that it can't be a check the box. I completed that training, but you weave all of this together. So every time we offer something up in regards to inclusion action or week of inclusion, we're connecting the dots of how this connected what we did last time and bringing all these pieces together. And sometimes you say, well, why do you have to make that clear? Because many people don't understand the experiences that are happening. And there's a spectrum, and I kind of talk about this, there's a spectrum from 1 to 10. Some of us are at 8, 9, and 10 because we have to be. Some of us are not even at 1 because they never had to be. Right. And so it's kind of bringing those individuals along and help them become aware. We put a lot of resources together in regards, we have an article on race, but we have an episode of Blackish on our website. Right. And so nice. People can on their own give them resources so they can begin to understand. We have a catalog of TED Talks and books. So we gave them references on how to get out there and continue to educate yourself on your own as we educate you as a broader organization. And I tell you, the hit site that we have on our D&I website has just tripled over time because there are people who are really curious. But let me also be clear with this too. We have people who aren't curious. We have people that fundamentally disagree with what we're doing. And I'm not saying you don't have a right to your opinion, but we have an expectation how you will interact with our employees while you're here.
Yeah, that's amazing. And let me ask you this. As you're building on the education, the website, all different initiatives that you have, how do you ensure that this is built into the culture and strike that balance between not doing too much and like people just get fatigued and all the stuff coming at them to the point that they withdraw a little bit, to the point of, making sure that it's not just a once or twice a year, but you do have to build it into the culture. So how do you strike the balance between building it into the culture, but then making sure that you're not putting too much too fast as you're going through this journey, because it is a journey, not a sprint. And so we want to make sure that we make it down this journey. So how would you do that?
Yeah, there's a balance there because it's important that you find avenues that you can embed D&I into your practices and your policies. That this isn't some okay, go over there and do D&I. No, D&I has to be part of how you operate, how you talk, how you speak to one another. And so in January, the company introduced new values, and there's 5 values to the organization. So, and people are still kind of learning those values because ideally your values should help drive your culture. Yep. And so remember I shared with you that we have a week of inclusion that's happening October 5th. Well, every day we're tying our D&I programming to one of our values. The first day will be put people first. So the programming is associated with that one. The next is be bold and decisive, program associated with that one. So it's not okay, let me think about D&I as it relates to the values, but how D&I is part of our values and how our values is part of our culture. And so when it becomes less of an add-on, but more of an embedded thread, I think it feels less heavy and more natural. But again, it's not natural to everybody. Sometimes what's natural to us may not be natural to everyone, right? And so that's the journey that I'm referring to. But it's how do you connecting that culture and values in D&I are different, and here are how they're all anchored to one another, how they're connected to one another. And so that week of October 5th is another way of us saying, our values, there are 5 of them, and as you learn them, here's how inclusion relates to each of those. And so we're really excited about kind of continuing to connect those dots. And sometimes connecting dots is not easy for people because some people don't even see the dots. And so you have to help them connect the dots.
So let me ask you, through all of that, what's been one of one of the bright spots that you've seen just within the organization? If you can kind of point it out as you're going through some of this change.
Let me tell you this. The commitment that we have of our CEO has been tremendous. I caught this. I will say to you, I think I shared with you earlier, I didn't know our CEO. He was here when I left in 2004, but at that point he was a CFO. And so I didn't know Gavin at all. And when I interviewed for this opportunity, this was when it was pre-COVID. And so I went to Chicago, have this conversation with him. And I should share with you that Gavin was born in South Africa. And so we had this hour conversation. And within 20 minutes, we're talking about apartheid and Nelson Mandela. And I'm like, wow, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is heavy, man. I just want a job. I didn't this whole life changing. What you're talking about is deep. and then he made a statement. I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. He said, "I grew up under apartheid. When I came to the States, I didn't even know there'd be elements of that still here."
Oh man!
And even when I say it out loud, again, even though I paraphrase it, it still kind of gives me some bumps. I'm like, so a man who's under this, this apartheid situation as a white South African can really have the understanding of what some of Black Americans are going through. And so sometime when you have a CEO in that place, he or she may not always be able to connect to what's happening beyond kind of their role, right? I'm not pulling Gavin at all. And in fact, he's pulling me faster. And I'm like, okay, let me catch up, right? That's been so rewarding because again, because this is my third tour of duty, in some cases, I didn't know what to expect when I came back here, and have a CEO that has this level of commitment. And then let me just add just another comment to give you another illustration of how level of commitment. So I report to our chief HR officer and within the organization, and Gavin and his leadership team meets twice a week. Just like in June, all of a sudden I get an invite that not only am I supposed to attend those meetings Mondays and Thursdays with Gavin leadership team, so he's already elevated me in regards to making sure that this voice, this D&I is on a regular voice with his staff, but I also meet with him one-on-one once a week. This just came, like, again, I didn't say, hey, Gavin, can I get time on your calendar? He said, we're now going to meet one-on-one. We're going to have these conversations. And sometimes we're talking about the business. And sometimes I'm just educating him of like, what's happening. Just that being in this space right now, I don't know how long like this will last, but I'm milking it for the whole time because it's an opportunity for us to it's an opportunity not for me to make a difference in regards to like my career, because this is so bigger than Stephen Brown. It is, how do I help the others out there? How do we be part of this healing and recovery of one of the reasons why I rejoined the company back in March?
Man, you done dropped so many jewels in that right there. First of all, shout out to Gavin. It's Gavin, right?
It's Gavin,
shout
man.
out to Gavin. So Gavin has stepped up. I mean, at the table, got your own table, your own conversation. Just that's what's needed when you think about leading from the top, right? And the fact that you might not necessarily be on his direct staff, but the importance of what's happening for whatever time you're there so that you can have that direct connection. Because as we're leading through this and as we're going through this time, right, look, there's some things to where that action has to happen fast and you have to have that insight, from the, top leadership to make it happen. But then at the same time, to be able to also just have the discussions to where you're not even saying, hey, we need to do this, this, and that, but more of a, let's just talk. Let's just have that discussion. Let's just, what's all happening, get your thoughts, get your perspective, and just have a conversation about it. It might not lead to a situation where we have an action come out of it, but it's going to both help us gain deeper insights.
That's right.
Into what's going on right now. That's amazing. And so one of the things that I want to, speak through as we think about leading through this time, as we think about everything that's going on, and we're getting close to the end here, is I want to make sure that we tackle this is, how important is it as you're going through and with everything and all the different initiatives and all the great work that you're doing around diversity and inclusion within the organization? How important is it, one, to address mental health well-being in the workplace? And how do you go about focusing on these topics so that it comes from a place of being authentic so that you can really make an impact within the organization?
Well, early on, I mentioned this word, trauma. Trauma is real. And trauma can happen for people if they're directly involved. Again, going back to, Mr. Blake and his 3 kids, or just watching CNN all day and just seeing the same clips over and over again. Or just knowing that your child is out there or you're out there and you're driving and, do you go into certain neighborhoods? And so one of the biggest things I ask people to be okay with is say when you're not okay. This is some really heavy stuff. And also just do a check-in on if people are okay around you. We bring that to work with us. We bring it to within our families. And at the risk of being, generalizing, there's many times us in the Black community aren't always comfortable talking about mental health. We're not always comfortable talking about when I need help. There's so many roles that we play that we have to be strong for everyone, but yet we're becoming weak for ourselves. It is about being important to address that. And, just on a very personal note, and this is a little bit outside of the injustice that's happening, but I just I go back to when I first sought some help, the passing of my mother. I was raised by a single parent. She was 19 when she had me. She was only 43 when she passed, which means I was 24.
Oh
And
man.
so, I thought, and then I had a young sister who I became her guardian. So I'm 24, my sister's 16, and all of a sudden I'm a quote unquote guardian, a parent. And
Yeah.
I reached out and I got help. It was important for me to be mentally okay as I was going through this journey, right? And I hesitated going to see a therapist because we don't, again, at least where I came from, you don't talk about going to help. There's, and again, I'm going to just, be very honest. It talks about, take care of yourself, pray.
Yep.
Prayer is important, but sometimes you need someone
Mm-hmm.
who is a legitimate therapist to help you through that. So I would say that you deal with that in the workplace as well. You look around and you find out who's not okay. You make sure that you have, and my therapist, I went through employee assistance program, EAP, and I got that connection. It's okay not to be okay. It's not okay not to ask for help or seek others out. And so I asked that we focus on that one, that again, this trauma is real. In some cases, this trauma is resurfacing and even and accelerating and deeper. And so we just have to make sure that we share with individuals that is that going to EAP or finding someone to talk to. Another piece I want to add to this, Cedric, is some cases, because of all the other stuff, in some cases, people also are now, at home alone a lot, right? And so, this gets in your head. You start to think a lot, and and you get concerned, and you have no one to go to, and so check on folks as well, either your colleagues or your friends. Just check on that one, and just it's okay not to be okay, but try to reach out and see if you can help somebody through this challenging time. These are times that we never had before. So just, even if you need to put a tickler on your calendar saying, I haven't checked in with Cedric for a while. And Cedric, you don't even need to reply. I'm just letting you know that I'm thinking about you right now. And just doing that even within the workplace, check on your Black employees, check on your brown employees, check on your young employees. Just do a little bit of a check-in and just say, how you doing?
Man, I'm with you, right? Even in some of these times, right, it could seem that with everything that's going on, no matter how many people are around you, no matter how many meetings that you're in, you still can feel like you're alone in the situation. And I think that this piece around us being at home, for those who are working at home and not in the office, and just having all of that time to think, right, and all of that time to be able to reflect on what's happening, right? In some cases can be good. In some cases, right, it could be detrimental, but checking in, even if it's just, hey, I think Apple now has the tap backs, right? Where you can just give a thumbs up or something. Just making sure that, whoever that is okay, right? Cause you never know what someone is going through, regardless of how they portray themselves on the external piece of that, like on the outside, right? No matter the smile, no matter, all of that, right? They still can have some things that they're not saying, but just being able to check in would be amazing through these times. Look, as we come, kind of to a close here, and look, we've had a great discussion on a couple of different topics, but it all comes back to that, leading, and as folks are listening to this, I hope they're pulling that, how to go in and look at their leadership style, how to go in and look at their leadership teams to be able to navigate through these times. So as we come kind of towards the end, right, for the individual that's listening, looking at everything that we spoke about, like what are the 2 or 3, actions that, they could take, coming from this conversation to take back to their organizations as they look to really authentically move their diversity and inclusion initiatives forward within their company?
One, don't think you have to do this work alone. Like there's a community of people like you, Cedric, and others who are in this space that are doing some really good work. So don't feel like you shouldn't tap into others and see what they're doing and see how that can work in your organization. The other piece I mentioned earlier, if you haven't done this already in your companies, listen to your employees. Ask where they are, what their expectations are. It's really interesting. Sometimes we want to put a strategy together before we know what we're trying to solve for or what people need, right? And so just pause and ask a question and listen to people. What are you looking for? And so I think if, again, you remember, you're not in this alone, go to others. and listen to your employees to figure out how you want to move forward. Those two pieces can help on this journey.
And there it goes. And there it goes. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, Stephen, any parting words, shout outs, where people can find you if they, would like to connect with you on social media or anything like that?
Well, first of all, Cedric, I appreciate you asking me to do this. And again, I've been knowing you for a long time. And I love what you have done with your career and decided to run this business. I'm on LinkedIn, Stephen D. Brown at Molson Coors. I don't have all the answers, but I'm always curious to have the conversation. And so if there's anything that I can do, reach out to me. But I also, again, say that, I lean on you as you lean on me. And
awesome.
So that's what I love to do.
No, well, look, that does it for us. Thanks for joining us on the 3D podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Cedric Chambers _. And if you have any questions you'd like me to read or answer on the show, or would like to just hear more about my thoughts on diversity and inclusion on a regular basis, you can text me. Yes, text me at 770-285-0404. And you'll receive content straight to your phone, insights from me. We can message back and forth. It's not a bot. It's not an assistant. The responses come directly from me. And so, look, this has been Cedric Chambers, and you've been listening to Stephen Brown, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Molson Coors. We out. Awesome. Well, that does it for us. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the 3D Podcast. If you would like to connect on social media, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Cedric Empowers. And if you have any questions you'd like me to read or answer on the show, or just want to know more about my thoughts around diversity and inclusion, entrepreneurship, or just overall business, you can text me. Yes, I said text me at 770-285-0404. You'll receive content straight to your phone on a regular basis, and you can message back and forth with me. Not a bot or an assistant. All responses come directly from me. Well, look, this has been a great episode. Until next week, this has been Cedric Chambers, and you have been listening to the 3D Podcast. We out.